I've been sitting here for a good 15, 20 minutes now, something along those lines. And I've been thinking about how I want to open up the episode of this podcast. And I think I've settled on it. I think I've settled on how I want to open up this very first video of the new version of Darren Talks Ball. And that is, I want to open up with a question. I want to ask you guys, what truly constitutes a blue blood college football program? Like, what really makes for a blue blood in college football? Is it just sustained success? Is it the iconic moments throughout history that a particular program has happened to be a part of? Is it a long-standing history of success, iconic moments, iconic players? We often talk about this in the off season, right? We talk about things like blue bloods and legacies and great coaches, and I think that part and parcel to being a fan of college football is that we all like to reminisce. And we all know that college football has an incredibly long off season, which really kind of gives us a good amount of time to do so. This isn't baseball. This isn't basketball. This isn't Formula One racing where you have 3 or 4 months and in some cases even less than that. And then the season picks right back up again. No, we have the majority of the calendar year to debate these things as college football fans. And as college football fans, we are incredibly passionate and we care deeply about these things. I was thinking about this debate earlier today, and this is why I bring it up regarding Michigan football specifically, which, if you haven't caught on yet, is the subject of this very first video slash podcast episode we're doing on this, again, newly refurbished channel, I guess is what you call it. Technically a new channel, but we're basically rebooting the Darren Talks Ball brand. Michigan is definitely a blue blood. I don't think anyone would argue that. But I think for the last couple of seasons now, especially looking back in retrospect, as we college football fans like to do, it's missed something. Or at least certain people leading the program claimed that it had something, but it definitely turns out didn't have that something, or pretended or feigned as if they were what they said they were. And it turns out certain individuals that used to lead this program, well, they weren't exactly everything they said they were. Michigan football under Sharon Moore, in a way, lacked a solid identity. And while it was happening over those 2 seasons, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I couldn't quite identify what the key issue was, but I would say, looking back now, it was an incongruence. It was a flaunting and chirping and boasting all of the platitudes and cliches in the world, not actually being about it. Michigan football, in a lot of ways, lacked an identity, in that specific way, I should say. But as we all know, that does not appear to be the case any longer. This program has now moved on, turned over a new leaf, and hired a coach whose identity as a man, identity as a person, identity as a coach, well, you couldn't ask for a better fit, could you? And throughout this video, I'm really going to make the argument that because of that, because of the way this man really kind of slides right into the head coaching role at the University of Michigan and seems to, well, I can't even say seems to, definitely does. We know by now, definitely does with his long coaching track record, possesses all of the qualities that you would want of a Michigan head football coach. And I'm going to spend the rest of this video arguing that Michigan football, albeit a team with a true sophomore quarterback who's, let's admit it, has not fully proven himself yet, with many young players along the offensive and defensive lines and all over this roster, with new coaches galore and an entirely new coaching staff. I'm going to argue that despite those things, and even with a tough, incredibly tough schedule, they're a team that nobody, and I mean nobody, should look past in the 2026 college football season. Of course, Kyle Whittingham now joins the program, long tenured coach at the University of Utah. Really, after Urban Meyer was the guy that got Utah to, new heights, brought them to heights that people at the time never expected that program, never anticipated that program would ever make it to. Kyle Whittingham was really the guy that made Utah the brand that it is today, though. I think people forget that. Kyle Whittingham took over after Urban Meyer left and made sure that success was sustained, basically. And I know there were down years. There were years where he went 7-5 and even 6-6, and we can get into that in future episodes and maybe even later in this episode. But there were definitely successes that you'd never expect to see from a program the size of, and with the financial limitations, we got to mention the finances now these days in 2026 regarding college football. With the financial limitations, the recruiting limitations, and the overall limitations on the entire program, Kyle Whittingham went toe to toe with some giants in college football. And I always had this thought experiment every time I thought about Kyle Whittingham over the last decade or so. And I'm going to admit, I've thought a lot about him because, frankly, he's been one of my favorite coaches in all of college football for some time now. So, of course, I'm excited to see him come and coach my favorite team. Whenever I've thought of Kyle Whittingham, I've always had this thought experiment go on in my head, kind of an automatic thought for you, psychology, CBT heads out there. What if Kyle Whittingham had more talent? What if Kyle Whittingham had a roster that really was on par with the level to which he's capable of coaching? We think of coaching talent and we think of, on the field talent. And some of the greater programs have both, right? Ohio State has both, we have to admit. Even as Michigan fans, I assume most of you watching this video will be Michigan fans. You have to admit that Ohio State has both. Ryan Day's a great coach, and they have great talent. Kirby Smart is a great coach, and they have a high level of talent that they bring in each and every season. The formula in college football is and always has been, whether you get it through the recruiting rankings, your regular historic recruiting, going through high school recruiting, I should say, or you get it through the transfer portal. It's always required on the field talent and high-end coaching talent. Even the great Nick Saban didn't win games at Alabama without players like Derrick Henry. Guys that have now moved on to the NFL and become stars. We know from Kyle Whittingham's track record, and albeit there are some not pauses for concern, but I think we do need to pump the brakes just a little bit. The man, after all, does have a losing record against the top 25. He's something like 24-58 or something like that in his tenure. 24-38 maybe is actually what it is now that I think about it. I have to go and check it again, but he has a losing record against the top 25 in his time at Utah. He overall has a losing record against Oregon, although he did beat Oregon a couple times. Notably, he's never beat a Dan Lanning Oregon team. He does have some pauses for concern, I would say, but given the talent he had at Utah, all he had to work with, he had sustained success at a program that was never supposed to be a Pac-12 team or a Big 12 team or a major college football school. Utah, when Urban Meyer took over, was in the Mountain West. And like we said earlier, just a few minutes ago, Kyle Whittingham took that success that Urban had and ran with it. Most notably, speaking of Urban Meyer, going toe-to-toe with an Ohio State team just a couple of seasons past Urban Meyer in one of the best Rose Bowls we've ever seen. It was also a Utah-led Kyle Whittingham team that single-handedly kept USC and Caleb Williams out of the record books in 2022 and out of the college football playoff. What happens when a giant killer suddenly becomes a giant himself, I guess is what I'm asking. What happens when Kyle Whittingham finally gets resources? What happens when he finally gets talent? What happens when a man who we can all say is an elite developer, having developed guys like Dalton Kincaid and some great Utah players over the years, what happens when he gets, the premium high school recruits to work with? One Bryce Underwood being one of them. What happens then? And granted, things aren't entirely the same. The schedule is incredibly difficult this season. I don't need to go through it, but for most of you watching, I'd assume you're already aware. But let's just go through it for the sake of, I'm sure there might be a couple people watching who haven't gone through the schedule yet. Michigan does have to play Oklahoma again this season, an SEC power, though that will be at home. Then the Big Ten schedule, just a couple weeks later, starts with a tough Iowa team, then a road trip to Minnesota, Penn State, Indiana, Oregon, and Ohio State are all also on the schedule. But again, with the talent that one Kyle Whittingham now has, knowing his ability to develop, even with this tough schedule, you can't overlook this Michigan team this season. And now I'm not going to make any major predictions here. If you follow my other channels, you know how I honestly feel about how this team is going to finish this season. But even so, even if the team finishes where I think they're going to finish, it's still going to be a really exciting season because you've got a legitimate, high-quality college coach heading this program again. And we saw what the raw talent could do last season, even with a lack of coaching. Now, I have Bryce Underwood on the screen, of course, right now, because I obviously want to talk about him at great length as we go through the offseason and head into the preseason time. When we hit like August and stuff, we'll really be doing our previews and things. And we'll talk a lot about Bryce Underwood going forward as well. But here, I just want to mention that Bryce Underwood seems to finally have some coaches that understand his game and what his game needs to look like. And people who aren't afraid. We talked about it at the outset of this video. Sharon Moore made himself out to be something in a lot of regards and a lot of aspects that he wasn't. One of them was he was a little cowardly with the use of his quarterbacks in his offense. We know now that Jason Beck and Kyle Whittingham are not going to hold back when it comes to using what I think is, frankly, the best, highest quality aspect to Bryce Underwood's game for now, and that's his running ability. And that's something that you have to take into consideration. I know everybody's talking about it. This isn't anything novel. This isn't anything new. This isn't anything you haven't heard already if you're a Michigan fan. But if you consider the fact that they're finally going to use the kid the way in which he should be used, like a Vince Young, like a Cam Newton, like an RG3, like the quarterbacks he's been compared to as one of the highest regarded high school recruits to come out of high school in a long time. Well, that gives you reason for excitement, good reason for optimism. There's not always great reason for optimism. The logic is never, fully thought out. But in this case, I think it definitely is. And it gives Bryce Underwood time if he's running things that, by the way, he ran a lot of in high school. He ran a lot. He was a running quarterback in high school. Gives him time to develop his arm, and the offense won't have to rely so heavily on his arm. Here and there, you're obviously going to want to pass the ball quite a bit, and especially in this new spread option offense, you're going to still be throwing the football. And don't get me wrong, I do want Bryce throwing 20, 25, 30 attempts a game. But mixing in those runs means that drives can be extended. Extended drives means more reps. More reps means more experience, which means a better quarterback at the end of the season. And I think that's what you're going to get with Bryce this season, and that's why I'm excited for him. Reason number three, essentially, and why I'm excited for this Michigan offense and this Michigan team overall headed into the season is, and I think people forget, by the way, because Michigan had such a down year last year, because the Sherrone Moore tenure was not so great overall, people forget that Jordan Marshall had an insane sophomore season last year for Michigan football. Redshirt freshman season, actually. I corrected myself there. And I need to correct myself there, I should say. Jordan Marshall, despite splitting carries for most of the season with Justice Haynes, and I know Justice Haynes ended up going down with an injury, but still, Justice Haynes was getting the majority, the slim majority of the carries. It was a pretty 50-50 split from what I remember until the injury. But even with the sharing of carries, Jordan Marshall ran for nearly 1,000 yards as a redshirt freshman last season. By the way, behind an offensive line that largely returns, by the way, behind an offensive line that has a better offensive line coach this season than what they had last season. Jordan Marshall, in my opinion, is the best running back in the Big Ten, and I honestly don't know if it's really that close between him and Bo Jackson and Darius Taylor and some of the other great running backs in this conference. I said it on other channels and other videos. If I was an NFL team right now and I wanted a every down do it all running back, I'm taking Jordan Marshall. Jordan Marshall has the vision to run duo, to feel out gaps on duo and jump cut, and has the ability to jump cut into the right gap, the one that the linebacker isn't in, a la at Blake Corum, hit that gap with power and burst through it. He also has the ability to run stretch properly with that great vision. He has the ability to run zone and gap scheme stuff to effectively, and he will run just like I mentioned a minute ago. Really, he runs between the tackles just as well as he runs outside of the tackles. There's really not much the man can't do, and I'm excited to see him this next coming season. And we haven't even gotten into his backup, Savion Hyder, true freshman, 5-star number one running back in the class from this past season, who looks like a full-grown man already. Michigan finally actually has the identity in the ability to run the football, both with their quarterback and their all-world running backs, and they have the coach to back it up. Like, it's not just something written on paper. It's not just something hung on a sign in the halls of Schembechler Hall. It's not just something said to woo the media or make yourself out to be tougher than what you really are, which is really what the Sherrone Moore era was, looking back on it now. It's this is what we do, and we're going to do it, and unless you stop it, we're going to win. Michigan football is also going to be one of the more balanced offenses, I really think, in probably the last 10 years when it comes to this program. And especially, like I said earlier, with Bryce Underwood running a bit now, maybe picking up a few third downs, maybe extending some drives, therefore getting a little more experience, getting some more snaps, coming on this season as the season goes on. I think he'll become a better passer of the football. And he's got the tools, he's got the weapons now to throw the football to, and trust and expect them to get open, be open, catch the football, and run downfield. And I'm looking at one, Andrew Marsh in particular, who, didn't come on super early last season, but what freshman wide receiver does. Even the great Jeremiah Smith down at Ohio State took a few games to really get going. We all know, though, that once he got going, he didn't stop going. Andrew Marsh, low-key, one of the better young wide receivers in the entire conference. And oh, by the way, this wide receiver room just added Jamie French, a former highly touted recruit out of high school, super fast, athletic kid. J.J. Buchanan, who's a bit of a stretch slot, I guess you would call him, kind of a tight end slot wide receiver, very tall, lanky kid, can go up and get jump balls against man coverage. And then also Celesi Moa, a 5-star technical transfer from Utah, but a freshman who had committed to Utah in this previous season's class and now transfers to Michigan. This offense for Michigan this season, and I'm just primarily going to focus on this offense, the offense in this video, because we've still got 68 days to talk about this team headed into the season. And maybe this is me being the optimist that I am sometimes. As those of you out there who do know me, I am capable of being an optimist sometimes. I promise. I swear I'm doing it right now. This offense is probably more intriguing than any offense under the Jim Harbaugh era. And that's actually really saying a lot, because there were some offenses in the Jim Harbaugh era that did have some wide receiver talent. You just got to go all the way back to guys like, Amara Darboh and Donovan Peoples-Jones. But this offense is right up there. And I don't know if Kyle Whittingham, in fact, I know Kyle Whittingham has not had this much raw talent at his fingertips as a head coach, possibly ever. You could argue that the Cam Rising, Dalton Kincaid offenses of the early 2020s, with some other great players and some great offensive linemen were right up there as well. But if Bryce Underwood starts to become the quarterback that we all think he can be, this offense will really open up. And for the first time since 2023, there is a coaching staff that, as a Michigan fan, I fully trust and am truly confident in. No one, and I mean absolutely no one, should overlook Michigan football heading into 2026. Now, could this team with this schedule still finish 8-4, especially with, the typical growing pains of a first-year college coach, especially with the growing pains of playing a true sophomore quarterback, who, by the way, could very well still be in high school right now. He's still only 18 years old, will only turn 19 right before the season starts. Yes, they definitely could. They could go 8-4. They could go 9-3. They could even go 7-5. I'm not here to, try to gaze into a crystal ball and predict the future. I'll do that later on. But even if that's the case, I can guarantee you this team is going to be exciting, and we're going to come out of 2026 expecting this team to continue to grow and develop and become better, because that's what Kyle Whittingham has done consistently as a head coach over his entire career. It's frankly a great time to be a Michigan football fan, and I could not be more excited. If you listened all the way through this thing, if you liked it, go ahead and like the video. I'd really appreciate it. Subscribe, follow along. This is now my second attempt to run Darren Talks Ball and make it a thing. So, if you're not familiar with my work, I do also host what has become now the Big Ten Nerds, a regular podcast coming out every week focused on Big Ten football. You can also check us out over there. Links in the description to the Discord. You can always join the Discord and talk college football 24/7, 365. We'd appreciate having you in there. And as always, and forever, be kind to other people out there.